mod, and I'm supposed to run around with that one.
All right.
No?
No, this one? Oh, it's this one. Okay. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Juggling it. Give me one more. Wait a minute, is yours on? No.
We don't need it yet.
Well, thanks everyone for coming out. We're excited to see a good showing at the first event for women fundraising that Velero has put on. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, great. Well, in the interest of time and to be respectful of everyone's time, we want to make sure to get started. But before we do that, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsors and the hosts for the event. Firstly, I want to give a big thank you to Velero. Velero is a financial strategy firm for growth-minded entrepreneurs who want to invest in their business. Whether you want to expand an existing footprint, open a new location, or put a product out to market, Velero leverages the expertise of its partners to turn your wish list into growth and expansion. So thanks so much. I think Alex is in the room, and he's one of the partners at Velero. I wanted to definitely give him a big thank you for putting this on. And we have some other sponsors that we'd like to thank for sure. On October 4th, 1957, the Sputnik 1 satellite launched to set the stage for a new era of technological innovation in the space age. Tomorrow, on the 60th anniversary of that day, the Sputnik ATX accelerator is launching. Sputnik means partner in Russian, and Sputnik ATX wants to be your partner for takeoff. And they've been a really great partner in getting this event set up, so thank you so much. Now also, Carroll Counsel PLLC is a 100% woman-owned and operated law firm that specializes in early-stage, high-growth businesses and technology startups. Thank you so much for your sponsorship. So before we begin, I do want to introduce some special guests from the Ann Richards School for Girls, a school with a mission to help prepare young girls to be the leaders of the future. Please welcome Interim Principal Chris Waugh and Development Manager Caitlin Gant and Julie Bonney and Rihanna Henson, two students from the school.
Hi, good evening. I'm Chris Waugh. I'm the interim principal for the Ann Richards School. Has anybody ever heard of that? Yay, that's great. Well, we are an all-girls public school right down the street. We are grades 6 through 12. We are a STEM school, and so that means that every year, every girl takes a STEM-related course, and then in high school, they choose between biomedical, engineering, or media tech as a pathway. And so we do things very differently at our school. We put 11-year-olds and we teach them how to use the chop saw and power tools and the laser cutter and the maker space. And then we bring our 17-year-olds, or 18-year-olds, and we bring them in front of crowds and we have them tell you how they're going to change the world. So that's really important to us because we're a project-based school, and really what that means in educator terms is that we teach our girls to solve community problems. We want them to pay it forward, whatever they've been given, and reach back and be mentors to their sister. But the problems that we solve are ongoing in our curriculum. They're weaved into our curriculum. We don't do make-believe school. We do real problems that our girls have to solve, and we tell them that they have the capability of being able to do that. So today I brought two rock stars with me, Julie Bonney and Rihanna Henson, and they're going to talk about two different things that we do at our school. One is our internship program, and the other one is a project that they're currently working on that I haven't heard all the details, so I can't wait to hear. So.
Yeah. Just walk over first. Hi, I'm Rihanna. I'm a senior at Ann Richards, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our internship program. It's something that every single junior participates in, and for an entire week, we don't go to any of our classes, and we go, yes, and we go to real businesses around the city of Austin and work on real projects with individuals in the field. I was lucky enough to go to Rogers O'Brien, which is a construction management firm that's literally right across the street from school. So I wasn't going to a very different location, but I got to meet some really cool people there. And while I was there, I was able to work in their virtual design and construction program, and I actually got to build some models that are of buildings that are going up right now off of 35 on 6th Street, which is really cool. And I would like to say that it's not something where you just sit in a desk and you watch people work on computers all day, or you run and get coffee or anything like that. I was learning about the field and working in the field, and it's kind of sparked what I wanted to do in college, which is actually really neat. It's also sparked this project that Julie and I are working on right now that I'm going to let her talk a little bit more about.
Okay. Hello. Hi, I'm Julie. So actually, before I start talking about our project, I also went on an internship, and my internship was at Intel, which is off of I-35, I feel like. And I'm sorry, I don't know my roads, but yeah, Mopac, wow. So while I was at Intel, it was about a group of 7 of us, and we worked on these mini projects for that using like Intel products and things like that. And we were constantly working on like breadboarding and really cool stuff that we actually did in our 11th grade engineering class, which was digital electronics. And we were like breadboarding and wiring and like soldering, and like I was getting shocked like every day because I wasn't being safest all the time, but I learned my lesson from that. But the project that Rihanna was referring to is that every year, all of the seniors in their pathways, it's really a time where we delve really deeply into what we're passionate about. And for me and Rihanna, I was passionate about dealing with depression and things like that, and helping students who are going through like social anxiety or test taking problems or different things like that. And Rihanna's really passionate about helping like kids in schools and creating an environment for students to go to schools. So I'll let her get a little deeper into that.
Yeah, so this is something that I've noticed a lot, is that school buildings are not necessarily adequate spaces for children to learn in these days. Around the world, some schools are one room with dirt floors and no lighting, and one teacher for the entire, community. And so what we're working on right now is we're in the research phase of this project, where we're looking at different statistics involving depression in students related to going to school and having to learn in environments that are difficult to learn in. And so we found some really interesting statistics and research on that. And then throughout the rest of the year, we're going to be developing kind of like a formula for how to physically build a building that promotes growth in students, not only academically, but emotionally and physically and spiritually as well. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, and along with us are 2 other teammates who aren't here today, and their portions all have to do with one of our classmates actually really passionate about making sure students have adequate access to bathrooms and things like that. And another one of our students is really into interior design and trying to figure out how colors affect people's moods and different things like that. And so throughout this whole project, pretty much everything we're doing is centered around the idea of making school a place where students feel at home. Whether or not you can't find that at home or you can't find that outside of school, we at least want school to be somewhere where you feel like you're being appreciated and noticed for your talents, whether or not that's athletically or that's through your academics or that's through whatever it is. And so the point of our project is just to help students find out what they truly want in themselves and how to combat a lot of these like mental issues, and also dealing with like also having adequate restrooms. And we want this to be a school that can be used as a model all around the world. It doesn't just have to be used in the US. It doesn't just have to be used in like Nigeria or in London or whatever have you. It's something that can be universally used. And so that's just what we're hoping to figure out this coming school year.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Aren't they impressive? Yes. Yeah. Hi, my name is Caitlin Gant, and I'm the development manager at the Ann Richards School Foundation. So as that, I am privileged to be surrounded by these young women and their sisters every day, which makes for a pretty incredible job, I have to say. First off, I'd like to say thank you to Sputnik and Velero for asking us to be a part of this event tonight. It's truly inspiring to be surrounded by so many women entrepreneurs. I'm excited to hear y'all speak, and I'm really intrigued by it all. As I mentioned, the Ann Richards School Foundation, that's where I work, and it's a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded to help out the Ann Richards School for Young Women Leaders. So our mission is to raise funds that support the enhancement programming at the school, such as the programs that you just heard Rihanna and Julie speak to. We also support things such as a college-bound curriculum, as well as professional development for our teaching staff. None of these programs would be possible without the foundation, and the foundation would not be possible without the support of corporations and individuals such as you. So we are always searching for new relationships within the community. So if you have any interest at all in empowering young women to achieve their dreams, we invite you to come take a tour of the school. See the programs in action, meet some more of these amazing young women, and help us create the next generation of young women leaders. So if you haven't already, we have contact cards out at the registration desk. So on your way out, please stop by, grab one, say hello, and hopefully we'll get to meet a few of y'all. So thank y'all all so much.
So now I'd like to welcome our guests for tonight. The topic, of course, is going to be fundraising for female entrepreneurs, and we have some really fantastic guests that are going to talk to us about their experiences and give us some advice and really, focus a little bit on some of your background, but then we're going to open it up for Q&A. If you want to submit a question, you can submit it through Twitter using hashtag #SheStartedItATX, and we'll be able to give those questions to them live as they're coming in, but we'll also have mics for live question and answer session pretty shortly. And so, but before we get started, I just want to, if everyone's not familiar with who's with us today, I'll give you a brief background. For over 20 years, Kerry Rupp has launched, developed, and grown startup companies and new lines of businesses for established firms. As CEO and general partner at DreamIt, a top 10 U.S. startup accelerator and early-stage venture fund, Kerry was directly involved with the launch of 150 companies. During her 5-year tenure at DreamIt, she grew its programs to 5 cities, raised a $20 million follow-on fund, and initiated the DreamIt Access Minority Entrepreneur, DreamIt Athena Female Entrepreneur, and DreamIt Health programs. DreamIt companies in aggregate now have a market value of over $1 billion. Before DreamIt, Kerry was herself the founder of an online travel service, Holiday Go Lightly, which organized unique group travel excursions for women. She also advised senior executives at various firms on strategy, business development, and marketing. Kerry began her career as a consultant with McKinsey & Anderson Consulting, now Accenture. In addition to consulting, Kerry serves as a mentor at Capital Factory, an international accelerator, and on the advisory board of the Medical Innovation Labs, a platform for commercializing innovations in the medical device field. Please welcome Kerry Rupp. And with us also, we have Kelsey August, who's the owner of Lone Star Direct, a marketing firm she founded at 24 years old. She's also the CEO of Bonadea Gluten Free, an ancient grain baking mix company. She's been a serial entrepreneur for the last 2 decades and loves to create and grow business ventures. Kelsey's been a board member and president of EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, has served on the board of athletics for Ohio University, and was also the president of the American Marketing Association. She's won distinguished awards along the way, including being an Austin Under 40 winner, an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, as well as the youngest female entrepreneur to make the Inc. 500 fastest growing company list.
That's awesome, by the way. I'm just telling you. I almost gave myself a heart attack doing that.
Kelsey's been an active angel investor since 1998. She enjoys mentoring her portfolio companies. She's participated as a mentor in SKU, formerly Incubation Station, and is also on the board of CTAN, the Central Texas Angels Network. Please join me in welcoming Kelsey August. So without further ado, if y'all want to start giving us some background information, and we'll start with the Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess we're going to get started. At some point, I think hopefully we're going to turn the lights on so we can see you, so that when we're answering your questions, we can actually engage with you. So I don't know what the plan is for the lights, but we were going to start a little bit with what we do now with respect to investing. And so my bio didn't actually talk about my current job. So I'm actually one of the general partners of a venture capital fund called True Wealth Ventures with my partner, Sarah Brand, who I think is doing a similar talk like this at Capital Factory as we speak. And so we are in the process of raising our fund. So I have a lot of experience like you guys have on the ground of fundraising. It's not just you guys that have to raise. We have to raise money from our what we call limited partners. And so the goal, including Kelsey. And so, we actually have been in the trenches ourselves doing it. We have a different audience and a sort of a different business model, but we are fundraising ourselves. And it will be a $20 million fund, but we've raised about half of it to date. And so we're already making investments out of it. And so to tell you a little bit about the thesis, and then we'll talk a little bit after this around the difference between getting investment from a VC versus an angel versus other sources of funding. But we are looking very specifically at women-led companies, which we define as companies with at least one woman on the executive team. So it doesn't have to be the CEO, but it does need to be a significant, decision maker on the exec team who has a significant stake in the cap table. And since we're investing in seed stage companies, it tends to be one of the three founders or, that kind of thing. And the premise behind that is that when there are more women in the executive team of companies, whether they're Fortune 500 companies and board members or executive team members there, or early stage venture-backed companies, they have significantly better financial performance. And that stuff has been in the news a lot in the last year, which is great for it to finally be out there because some of this data actually started being found around 2010, but it took a while for it to become mainstream. So a lot of you may, especially as women in entrepreneurship, have seen these data, but I'm going to share a couple numbers just because they're so freaking powerful that if you haven't heard them, it's not like, oh, and the companies are kind of slightly better. They're dramatically better. And it's one of the strongest business levers that you can actually have an impact over. So the Kauffman Foundation did a study in conjunction with some university professors that showed that venture-backed companies that had a woman CEO tended to have 35% higher returns, 12% higher revenue growth, and they used a third less capital to do that, meaning they were getting better financial performances with a lot less dollars invested in the companies. And so it's possible that they couldn't get those dollars because they didn't have access to capital or because they weren't seeking capital or that they were actually just more frugal. It kind of doesn't matter. They still outperformed by double digits in terms of returns and revenue. It's a really powerful metric. There are a lot of, big Fortune 100 companies today that are trying to move their numbers by 0.5%, 1% a year. So when you can make double-digit growth just by actually diversifying your team, it's really powerful. But it's pretty hard in big companies to do that. So conversation for another session. So the first premise of our thesis is really to invest in these companies because they actually perform better. And the purpose of a venture capital fund at the end of the day is actually to make money. And if this is a way to do it, then let's do it. And it's really overlooked. I'm sure you all know, but latest PitchBook data showed that 2% of venture capital dollars go to companies with a woman CEO, which when you see the outperformance numbers doesn't make a lot of sense. And we could probably talk all day about what the reasons are behind that. And there's not, one answer. But we see a business opportunity there. And so our first thesis is just to leverage that business opportunity. But we're trying to be more strategic about it. And so we also focus on markets where women are also the primary customer. So we look at the fact that women make 85% of consumer purchase decisions and they make 80% of healthcare decisions. And we think there should be at least one woman on the executive team if the customer is a woman, which sometimes we call our duh thesis, because it seems pretty obvious. But unfortunately, it's not obvious. So 83% of venture-backed companies don't have a single woman on their executive team. And that's true even in markets where the woman is the customer. And so it's really hard to imagine when you think about it empirically. Your customer is a woman. You're going to have to design a product that she's going to care about. You're going to have to market to them, sell it to them, service them. And you don't have one woman on your executive team who's bringing that point of view to the table. So again, we think we'll have all the more better financial performance by focusing on those companies. So we specifically are looking at the impact verticals of what we're calling sustainable consumer and consumer health, less relevant for today's conversation, but just so you have a sense of what we're doing, focusing on things that improve environmental and human health. And I'll wrap up quickly and hand it over to Kelsey, but we're a seed stage fund, meaning that we are generally looking at investing at that early stage, so often in conjunction with angels. We tend to want to lead the deal, which means we'll set the financial terms of the deal and then take a board seat. Usually there are at least a couple board seats that go along with each round of funding. And so in our roles, we want to put enough money in that we can actually be active in the decisions of the company and in the day-to-day kind of operations, not say maybe not day-to-day, month to month or quarter to quarter, but that is our standard going in position. When we say seed stage, that doesn't always mean the round that's got a capital S and it's, sometimes it's actually, a pre-seed deal or it's a Series A. It's early stage, and a lot of times these terms blur. But our first check sizes are generally, we're going to put about $250 to $500K into a deal, which isn't usually the whole round. We need to syndicate with angels, individual angels or other angel groups or other seed stage investors. And then our plan is with this fund to invest in about 12 companies, so over 4 years. So that means we're probably doing like 3 or 4 deals a year total, and we're seeing 15 a week. So over the course of a year, we're seeing hundreds and hundreds, and only 3 or 4 are going to get chosen. So just to get a sense of the scope that we can handle. And so we will probably we'll put about a third of the money in our fund into those first checks. And that leaves us 2/3 to do follow-on investing, meaning we'll stay in about maybe 9 of our deals in their Series A round. So we'll, double up and ante in again. And then we'll stay in maybe 3 of our deals through their Series B round. But just to give you a sense is that we won't always be in those later stages of the deals for various reasons. And, we will basically don't have enough capital as a small fund to stay in through a Series C or Series D, et cetera. So we're mostly not looking at companies that are going to need that much funding, hopefully never. And but that our model is also not to always be in the deals all the time. So that gives you a sense of sort of what we look at. We'll talk more in detail when you get into the questions about sort of how does that mean it's good for my company or not. But that's what we do.
Thank you. Hi. So probably now 18 years I've been an angel investor. I have right now currently 40 companies in my portfolio. Half of them are woman-owned, led, run. So that's exciting. I like to invest in other women-owned companies. On the board of CTAN, Central Texas Angel Network. Joined the board this year, but I've been a member a couple years. And the reason being is because when I was an angel investor on my own, it was very hard for me to do due diligence. I couldn't be the expert on every company I was looking at. So the nice thing about CTAN is that there's 160 individual angels there that invest anywhere from $5,000, $10,000 to $250,000. So we do the due diligence as a group. So there's a lot of angel groups here in Texas. I believe there's 13 through ATAN. And then sometimes in our cycles, we have 5 cycles a year, about 60 or so companies per cycle. So we see about 300 pitches. And then we vet them down through due diligence to about a dozen that we send to showcase 5 times a year. And then we'll take those and we'll do deeper dives in due diligence and usually write a check for about half of those individuals. Or, I would say that we do about $600,000 for a typical round. And we are obviously seed as well, sometimes A, but we stay in that arena, startup. So
when you think about that with just we're collectively only doing so many deals a year, and there are, hundreds of you even in this room, right? And there aren't that many sources of capital in Texas. And so, it does mean that this process is really hard. And, understanding what each investor is looking for is a really important part, I think, of figuring out where you should go when you're seeking funding. So I thought we'd talk a little bit more about the profile of like what each of us looks for in a deal and what might be different about an angel deal versus versus a VC deal, especially since a lot of times we're actually in them together. So they're not always different. But there are some deals that sort of would never be venture fundable that could be angel fundable, maybe not through CTAN, maybe through individual angels. And so there is a different dynamic there. So I'll talk a little bit about our profile. And I don't want to ever be speaking for VCs because, there are different business models. So I'll try to, illuminate that a little bit. But one of the most important things that you think about when you're seeking investment is really understanding and going to read my website and seeing what is my investment thesis and what do I talk about there versus another VC, and not assuming that one VC has the same model as another. And the same is true for angels, except they usually don't have a website that explains everything they do. You might be able to look on AngelList and Crunchbase and some other places, though, to get a sense of their portfolio and see what they do. So we very specifically, as a small fund and an early fund, so this is our first fund, Sarah and I together, have some things about our business model that makes us need to do some specific things. So for example, we don't have enough capital in the $20 million fund to be in deals that require FDA approval, that are going to need lots and lots of money and lots of time before they can exit, because we need deals that can exit relatively quickly so we can show that we did a good job and have a good return and raise fund two, for example. We also want to be working on companies that are really capitally efficient, meaning we can't have companies that are probably going to raise Series C and Series D because the $250K that we put in that maybe bought us 15 or 20% of the company, or 10%, depending on the model, is going to get diluted and become 10% and then become 5%. And yeah, it's okay. It's going to maybe be a bigger pie, but it's going to not move the needle for us in terms of return. So we are looking at companies that can basically get to, are striving toward a $100 million exit in the next 3 to 5 years, which means you've got to look at the market for who the acquirers could potentially be and see what kind of deals do they do. So a lot of deals might, for example, companies might be looking at, well, until they've got 20 million in revenue, they're really not on the radar of an acquirer, and maybe the multiple is 3 to 4x, and you got to look at, can that company actually get to 25 million in revenue in the next 3 to 5 years so that an acquirer finds them attractive and could buy them for that much, for example. We don't want them to need a lot of capital to get there, so that means if they think they're going to need to raise a seed and Series A and a Series B, those things actually all come into our attention when we're actually looking at a deal. The other thing is that we need to see, so we're, as a venture capital portfolio, we're going to expect, unfortunately, a number of our companies to literally outright fail. So we're going to put in 250 to 500K, maybe even go in on the Series A and have that company actually end up returning maybe zero, maybe some return of capital. And because of that, it puts a huge burden on the other companies in the portfolio to have a really great return. And so your expectations as a fund are different if you're a $20 million fund or you're a $200 million fund or a $1 billion fund, whether you're going for a 10x or a 7x or a 5x for each thing, depending on how many you think you're going to fail. But it means that if you think you can sell your business in 5 years for a 2x return, that's not good enough for me. I need to see more like a 10x return so that I can actually overcome the 0x's that I'm going to get on the companies that fail. And so that's when you hear about companies not being scalable enough or not having a big enough exit. It's not that your company actually doesn't have an interesting business model as an individual running that business and being able to sell it, but I can't invest in it because I'm not going to make enough money to make up for my losses. And that isn't a reflection on your business. It's a reflection on my business model as a venture capitalist, because I'm, looking for these big hits in there that are going to counteract the losses that I didn't expect. Now, one of the things that's different about our fund versus other funds that you can look at is that we tend to not look, partly because of the nature of being small and being new and all these things, at what I'm going to call binary technology risk. So meaning we don't look at things where the science hasn't been proven yet, and you're investing in the idea that the science would be really cool if it were true, and you're going to go spend all this money on the research, and I might just find out, oh, whoops, seemed like a good idea, but it didn't work out. I can't take that risk or can't spend that money and time. Same thing with technology. This technology may or may not work. We're really looking at things where there's already either a proven science or technology, or it's just a business that you can see, yeah, people have this need and here's this product that solves it. And our risk is much more about the execution, that the entrepreneur actually is going to figure out how to do it right, get customers, figure out how to scale it. And so Therefore, I'm not expecting one huge big Airbnb or Google and like 99 losses. I'm expecting a bunch of, singles and doubles and more successes, because I know the businesses are good and that, the entrepreneurs can figure it out with the right advice and the right access to customers, et cetera. And so maybe it's not going to be $1 billion or $5 billion kind of, exit, but it's going to be $100 million exit. And if I get a bunch of those, that's a good win too. And that's different than, a lot of the Silicon Valley investors, et cetera, who have these big pools of capital. They can make these big bets on these binary things and then expect to go for a really big win. And that's why I say it's important to think about, if you talk about, okay, they're a VC, what do they want? Not all VCs actually have that same model around what they're looking for. So I probably kind of created a lot more questions than I answered maybe with that, but it just gives you a sense of, we're looking at our whole portfolio. So when we're evaluating your deal, it's not only about your deal, it's about how your deal actually fits into the 12 deals I'm going to invest in out of this fund.
We don't have a formula. We invest in wide. So we go B2B, B2C, life sciences, consumer product goods, CPG. We will be on the trip if we go to an F round. Angels are very open to whatever comes their way. For example, in my portfolio of 40, I touch probably equally all the special interest groups, the B2Bs, the B2Cs, and I'm widespread and even, because I believe that I put in a dollar amount pretty much even to all my other 39 investments, and spread the risk and the wealth. I also think that our risk tolerance is very similar to yours, though. We expect the rule of thumb for angels, about 50% will go under of the companies that we invest in, and we know that going in, or we should know that going in. So we are hoping to get a 4 to 5x on the other 50% to make it worth our while. And we mentor and we give advice. We usually ask for a board seat, just like you do. So as we pull our monies together, that there is an angel that'll step up and be hopefully active on the board. What else did we hit?
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting is, while we expect companies to fail, I mean, you have to expect that in your business model. You're going to be sadly mistaken. You can't expect any one investment to fail at the time of investment. So the conviction is very strange, right? And so some are going to fail, but you have to think the company, especially if we're choosing only 3 or 4 a year, is really badass, like when you're actually making the investment. And so it's pretty hard. You have a little bit of stubbornness over time to actually start to recognize when a company's failing, what you can do to save it versus, okay, this is one of the failures. Right. Because going in, you have to think this thing is going to be one of the winners, and you have to think every one of the ones you choose is, even though ultimately they won't be, which is just an interesting dynamic to think about when you think about, okay, they're expecting failure, you're expecting risk. Well, not on every one of the ones I've chosen until they become that one.
Although there's a subset of angels called, impact angels. So they are okay with getting a mild or a small return, or just be impactful in the community or in that vertical.
And actually, that, just to mention that term, because so the word impact means different things to different people, actually. And so it can be challenging because sometimes investors are looking to have impact and a top tier financial return. And other people are actually looking for a concessionary return or a subpar return because they care about, maybe it's building schools in Nigeria that are going to actually be better environments for the students there. And so while maybe with their other investments, they're looking for a 5x return, they're willing to take a 1x return or a 2x return on that particular one because they also care about the impact they're having. And the word gets used for both, which means it's really hard to actually use as a word. Yeah. Okay, so we have a lot of questions that have sort of been given to us here, but we thought it would be more fun if we actually started engaging the audience. So I just wanted to tee up either turning on the lights or whatever we're doing to get the microphone going around. Before we do that, though, I had a question that came to me today already. So we were interacting with a company that it didn't fit our investment profile for some of the reasons of, it's not going to grow to a $100 million exit and get acquired in the next 3 to 5 years. It doesn't have sort of the scalability for that because it's got a services component and a physical location component. And so when an entrepreneur hears that, they want to get other sources of funding. And so we often try to give them recommendations if we know other entrepreneur or other channels for funding. So sometimes it's just my VC fund does human and environmental health. So if it's in another sector, it's not for me, but it might be for someone else, you know, in the community that I can pass it on to. But sometimes, especially just because there are only so many angel groups and VC groups, people want to look for alternate sources of funding. And so I thought we'd just sort of riff a little bit on what some of those options are. And my favorite one ever is customers.
It's a crazy notion. It's bootstrapping at its finest.
But it is really, honestly, often neglected. People, especially given, honestly, the number of events there are that all talk about fundraising and talk about angels and talk about VCs, is that people think that you come up with, oh, I have a business idea, now I need to go get it funded. And not only first do you need to make sure that there's customer need, and though I would say customer discovery always comes before funding, and validating that there's actually enough people who have a big enough pain and there's a scalable way to reach them before you go build a business plan, but that if you can get some of those early customers to pay you, not only do they help fund you at a zero cost on your equity, but they also provide the validation that might make a later investor come in. And so there's kind of a couple different models of that. And so in some businesses, unfortunately, it is just not an option. You have huge, big fixed costs that you have to go solve before you can actually bring in customers. And so it's hard, but that isn't always even a hurdle. If you have someone for whom it's compelling enough, you might get
Here we go, everybody.
And the answers are going to get a lot more interesting. You might literally be able to get a customer to prepay you to go build those fixed costs in order to build the product. And they might ask for exclusivity for a period of time, or they might ask for certain rights to the product or revenue sharing or whatever. But that is always pretty much cheaper than actually having to dilute your equity in the company or to pay for a loan or in traditional kinds of financing. So I just want to encourage everybody to always get even super creative around not just, oh, well, I don't have the product yet, I can't sell it, but does someone care enough to help you actually pay to build the product? And maybe you pay them off over time, like they get the first, 1/10 of all the products free for the first year, and you can still make revenue along the way or whatever. But those models are really worth pursuing before you actually go look for any of our money. We are not always a great source of money. We are sometimes very expensive.
Well, and I think the thing that I love the most is try to think, even if you have a CPG, a consumer product good, or you think you're a B2C play, there's always a B2B play that's smarter. So going to the big boys, if you're a cosmetic company, go to L'Oreal, go to the big players, Estée, and see if there's something that you can do with their research and development or with their marketing team, Amazon. There's so many other ways to get your product out. So sometimes B2B play is always smarter than a B2C. B2C usually takes a lot longer and more capital.
Yeah, I mean, especially if it's a B2C channel and you've got to pay for marketing and Super Bowl ads or whatever else. So even though our company, like I talked about, we're focused on consumer, we're focused on the consumer making the decision, but we're finding a lot of places where a B2B2C channel can be helpful. So for example, we've got this company, BrainCheck, and they have a concussion platform for athletes, among other things. And so they want to get to athletes and parents, but wow, it's way easier to sell to schools or sell to sports teams and then have the parents or the athletes upgrade, to get their own version of it versus then trying to just put ads on, TV and be like, hey, do you want to check your brain health, right? And so even looking for channels that can help you from a B2B point of view can really be valuable. Another thing that I just wanted to mention, because it actually specifically applies to women, is crowdfunding. And obviously there's so much happening in that space, a lot of evolution that's happening with the Jobs Act. But the numbers are really encouraging for women. So I mentioned that the PitchBook numbers were 2% of venture capital dollars go to companies with a woman CEO. But when you look at crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter, 35% of the deals that get funded on there have a woman founder or CEO. Actually, I don't know which one it is, so don't quote me on that. But I know it's 35% go to women. That's a 10x, like an order of magnitude difference. And so it's just a more amenable place as a woman to get funded. I've got some theories around why that is, but there's a lot of data that shows that traditional pitch process of, pitching to a room of VCs, who, by the way, 99% of them are men, or at least the investment decision makers are men. Getting yourself out of that process can be really helpful. So there are other other just venues where you engage with your potential investor in a different way than the traditional stand up in front of a room and pitch gives you an advantage as a woman. And so I mentioned that specifically because I imagine some of the topic today is really about what are the gender differences of fundraising. And so that channel can be helpful. There's a lot of now alternatives to even to crowdfunding. It's not just the Kickstarter kind of model where you're giving something away to get some cash, but you can give equity away. And there's some interesting kinds of debt financing where you can actually bring friends to the table that are willing to find you, and there are matches to that funding. Or if you've already got some revenue and you're up and running, you can actually get some financing on that. So there are a number of alternatives. You have some other ideas you want to throw out there?
I think the vendors, the outsourcing, the consultant, to give them some equity. This town is great that way. There are so many people who are like, yeah, I'll take a half a point. Yeah, I'll take a quarter of a point. I want to be part of this. This is exciting. So check that out for sure.
And the other thing that is truly, truly hard to tap into because it's hard for us too. As VCs, a lot of our funding comes from what are called family offices. And I don't want to be condescending. Some of the audience may or may not know what those are, but I'll define them because they're not always known. Is a family office tends to be like a more professional organization that's literally whose full-time job is managing the money of a really rich family. So you're no longer just have like a wealth manager that's putting some money into the stock market. You've got a team of people probably. Some of them are family members and some of them are hired help who are lawyers and real estate people and, private equity people. And they're literally managing a way bigger strategy around how to keep this family's wealth, not only for this generation, but actually, going into other generations. And what's interesting about them as an alternative source of financing is that a lot of them, like to get directly into specific deals, especially if they have an emotional connection, much like an angel to a particular topic, but they often have a way different time horizon. And so for certain kinds of deals where you are doing, for example, FDA regulatory processes and you're trying to solve maybe a cancer that one of their family members had, they're often not trying to make that money back in their lifetime to buy their retirement property, but they're literally trying to think about their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And so they don't have that same restriction of my fund has a 10-year life. And not only do I need to get the money back to my investors in 10 years, I really need to show a return faster so I can actually raise fund too to keep my business model going. And so I have these arbitrary kind of restrictions on my timeline for getting capital returned, which may not match up with certain kinds of businesses. And so finding family offices who have that longer time horizon can be really different for a different kind of business.
So what's really important, we all live in Austin, Texas, or at least I think you do because you're here. Everybody is so wonderful about hooking you into the right person that you need to meet next. So network, go out and ask for, coffee. Meet as many people as you can. I know it kind of feels uncomfortable coming out of your skin, and extend your hand, your card, anything. I know that I probably meet with 10 companies a week that I can't help, but I always know someone who can help them. So ask.
Yeah. And family offices, I neglected to mention, are really hard to find. So imagine you're a really, really, really wealthy family with lots of money. You probably don't want to have a website that says, I've got lots of money, hit me up. And so a lot of times they literally don't even have a website, or sometimes they're super elusive and they have a company name and there's nothing about them except like a Bloomberg registration or something. And so you are required to do networking to find them. And it is a lot of hard work. We didn't talk at all about geography. We're very focused, obviously, on Austin. The ecosystem here, unfortunately, no ecosystem can have everything for everyone. Austin's is still developing. You won't always find your funding here, although you should note that most early stage investors want to be physically near you because they actually want to get pretty involved and be helpful. And it's just still true that it's easier to do that. When you're physically near. In fact, I had a board call today that Kelsey and I were talking about before the call. It was awkward because we were all on a conference call and you have those delayed silences and people are on mute and you just don't have the same dynamics as an in-person board call. And so you may have to go elsewhere to find funding, and some of these family offices are elsewhere and these angel groups are elsewhere. So don't neglect it as an option, but know that it's pretty hard early on. And usually what you're going to look for is syndication options. So I know CTAN syndicates with a lot of deals. Maybe the Tech Coast Angels group in LA will be willing to invest in you if they know that CTAN is on board and Kelsey's going to be monitoring the investment on their behalf. She's a credible person with this good portfolio. She does this all the time. So now I don't mind saying, hey, I think the deal is interesting, and someone I trust is there to, kind of take care of it for me.
Yeah, often we can't fill rounds. So even though CTAN puts in $400,000 or $500,000, the round is $2 million. So we're going to syndicate with our brethren and get it done for you.
Okay, so I'll stop talking and take the first audience question.
Oh.
Okay, so Lori, the mic's coming your way because it's a big room.
Hi, thanks for being here, and thank you for being so transparent. I think it's worth noting that you have said we're not for everyone. This is what we consider, and it's about us. It's not about you. That's incredibly refreshing. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And sometimes it's about us, right? But we're doing our best. So are you. And I'm early stage, and I feel really appropriately pre-revenue. I know where I'm at, and I would love some more resources or understanding or wayfinding around those different funding options, even if it's like, here's an example of someone who consulted for 2 years while they bootstrapped and got customers and did these things, or like you guys are here in the trajectory, but like what is here? What's in that part of the ecosystem, and if there's some resources for that?
Well, CTAN has several. So we have office hours, and we meet once a month on Wednesday. I believe it's the first Wednesday for 4 or 5 hours. And we have a couple dozen companies come. It's kind of speed dating. So you spend 5 minutes with us, individual angels, and you ask whatever your pain is. And your pain can be different for different people. Once you know that I'm in the CPG space and I'm an expert in certain areas, you might have questions for that. Or you see me as a female and you're like, wow, it's really hard as a woman. I've had these 2 issues come up. What can you share with me? So CTAN has that stuff for the community. So office hours and then mentoring hours.
And so certainly accelerators are an option for some companies. They're not for other people, especially there are different models of accelerators now. I obviously used to run one that was at the time a 3-month cohort where you had to like pick up and move and physically be somewhere. So you couldn't have quit your job yet. You have to have quit your job to do that. There are other accelerators that are more either virtual or they're not full-time, et cetera. So those are options for some people. There are actually a lot of other kinds of classes and networks, whether I think about like a Tech Ranch or the Rice Alliance, et cetera. I'm trying to think of like who has the best current list of kind of all the Austin resources in town, and I'm not thinking of one. So if someone, I mean, obviously the Capital Factory is going to have some of those. Galvanize is going to have some. WeWork, but there's also Austin Inno, which is a publication. There's some groups on Facebook. The Facebook startup. The startup, Austin Startups, et cetera. I kind of follow all of those, and Austin Digital Jobs even is a good place where there's dialogue happening around what's happening in town. You kind of need to be connected into all these like different groups and Facebook pages to kind of know what's going on. And getting involved in a program gives you a little bit more rigor and discipline around those kinds of things. There's no one answer because different companies and different verticals have different options. It did trigger for me a thought about when to engage with investors. And so one of the important things for us, and I think for a lot of investors, is it's so much easier to assess if a company is doing well if you see the change over time, as opposed to meeting you on one day and I don't know, your pitch sounded great and you're like, 100 users, that sounds great, or it doesn't. Like, I don't know what's good, But knowing that you had 100 users when I met you last December and now you have 100,000 users now that I see you in May, I'm like, holy shit, that's amazing, right? Like I can kind of tell the growth. And also, honestly, hearing that what you said you were going to do, and either that you actually did it or why you didn't and what you learned from how you did it. And so much of how we're making an investment, I mean, I think you've probably all heard this, but we're investing in the team. But so much is about transparency in knowing what the team is up to, trust in like their thought process. I mean, so much of what I'm assessing is literally, do I like the way the person has thought through that idea? What is their marketing plan or their strategy, and how do they think about it? Or when they overcame a hurdle, like what did they learn from it, et cetera? And so the more I've known you and then I see you over time, the more likely when it is time for you to go fundraise, that I'm going to say, okay, I trust this person. I know what she does. I've thought about, I've seen her hit blocks and overcome them, et cetera. that is great to do, but there's also first impressions are first impressions. So if you come early and you don't have your shit together and that's clear, you've got to overcome that hurdle, right? So how do you find the balance of coming to me at an early enough time that I can see and build that relationship with you over time, but making sure you're still poised enough or you still have your story together enough that your first impression is going to be good. I don't have an science to how you determine what that is, but it makes a big difference. And so to Kelsey's point, we're constantly trying to meet with companies, even if they're not fundraising yet, we at least want to touch base with you and know you. Just on the issue of transparency for us, which is super hard, and it's the same kind of problems you'll face as a fundraising founder. We have to raise the full fund before we can fully invest it. And so it varies which month, how many percentage of our time we're trying to spend on fundraising versus looking at deals, because our job eventually is to invest in deals. But gosh, right now it feels like 70% of our time is fundraising and 30% of it is left to talk to entrepreneurs, especially the ones that actually need our money right now, and actually work with our existing portfolio companies. So it's great in theory. It can often be hard to actually execute, but trying to get yourself, even in these kind of environments, to come up and meet someone and at least touch base, tell us what you're doing, and then over time we can kind of keep a relationship with you. I think that isn't answering your question specifically, but I think it's an important point about when is the right timing to engage. And by the way, so to the point of resources though, if other people have them and want to suggest them, maybe we can either bring them up at the end, or when you ask your question, throw in some resources that you know about.
Hi, my name's Katie. I met with you, Kerry.
Hello.
I am curious about companies that you have previously invested in, and if there's anything that's thematic as far as what you see from the company that they failed. So you invested in them, maybe $250,000 to $500,000. They failed. Is there something that happened thematically across them that you would say?
Pivot, pivot, pivot.
Okay.
So when we invest, I would literally have to say 60% of the time what they came in to do is not going to work out. And they need to pivot before they lose that runway of money. And if you can pivot, and if you're open to the advisory board or the board member or whomever that you're working with and see that pivot coming and you're not fearful, you're excited that maybe you're going to make it now, please do. I think people pivot way too late and they go out of business and use up all their cash.
I mean, I used to really joke. So at Dream It, I invested in and helped launch about 150 companies. And I used to literally joke that not one of them actually is doing what they said they were going to do when they came to Dream It. And I'm totally okay with that because they found what the customer actually wanted. But there is like this, again, these subtle balances of, you've got to have conviction as an entrepreneur because you're never going to have enough data to know for sure what you're doing is right. And so finding that balance between, okay, they don't get it yet that this is what's going to happen and I need to be persistent, and you're going to hit all these brick walls and you're supposed to like keep putting your head through them, and knowing when it's not that and you're not listening and actually the customer's over here, and finding that balance between persistence is required and they don't see what I see, and I'm not listening to the customer. It's almost always the customer's telling me something and you're not hearing it, right? And so if you can actually teach yourself to hear better or to ask unbiased questions, and so that you're not actually hearing what you want to hear, I think is a big thing on the pivot front. I would say another thing, unfortunately, that I saw at Dream It was founder issues, meaning the team's dynamics. And a lot of that comes from part of it in the accelerator world is throwing together a team to apply for the, the deadline. And so maybe it's, a little bit more of a function of the structure, but making sure that you've really had those conversations with your teammates and actually documented on paper, preferably with a lawyer, what the dynamics of your arrangement's going to be, so that you understand things and have those really difficult conversations. Like, I don't know where you grew up, but when my parents were always like, "Don't talk about money; it's not appropriate," or whatever. You got to talk about money with your founders. How much you have, how long your personal runway is before you have got to get paid and get a job. What your risk profile is personally for when it gets scary, because it's going to get scary and you're going to go, oh shit, we have like not enough money in the bank to get through next week and I don't know what I'm going to do about that, and understand that risk profile. And also honestly just life changes, like if you're at a certain age and you're going to have a baby at a certain time, like your risk profile is going to change, and that male or female, like having a family and those things are going to change things. And that's totally okay. You just need to make sure you've kind of like prepared with your team how that dynamic's going to work out. And you certainly didn't have an agreement that we were all just 30%, 30%, 30%, and it's all going to work out. And then, you know, person 3 unexpectedly, you know, gets a job or gets pregnant or whatever, and there's no vesting, and all of a sudden the whole thing gets undermined. And so really thinking through and having those transparent questions with conversations with your, you know, teammates, and actually documenting and having vesting, please have vesting, even as founders, is really important. Oh wait, this one was raised before.
Hi. So I had one question, and now I have a couple others. So I'll start with one of them. Having, an actual physical product and needing to manufacture, obviously that takes capital. And I'm hearing different things from different people. I've been told by like a group of people in New York who are like, yeah, if you don't have at least $100K invested yourself, you're probably not getting anyone's money for your product. And then I had other people say, oh no, you don't need to do that. This is how you, like, everyone has a different type of strategy. And I know that Austin is different than New York. Do we have or know of any physical product experience where people do their, like, have to fund their first round or don't? Like, what is the norm? Is there a norm?
There's never a norm. And I think more people you talk to, the more yeses you'll see or hear. It's like, oh, okay, I'm okay with pre-revenue, and you've put sweat equity in. Okay, you've been working on this for 3 years throughout your full-time job. I'm going to get behind this and learn more and see your pitch deck and sit down with you. So no, everybody's different. I
think the important thing to really recognize is how many meetings you're going to have with a no before you get a yes. And I mean, literally, I don't even know whether Sarah and I haven't done the ratio on our own fundraising, but it would probably make us cry. But you're going to have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of no's to get your yeses. But just getting to the yeses is the only important part. And so there are, and that's what I was trying to say, like, don't think of me speaking for all of VC. We have this like model, and it's like the model on which some of our investors are really focused specifically on our thesis. Others just like the gender aspect or like whatever. But like there's a business thesis to what we do. And other people have a really dramatically different thesis. And there are a lot of people that just are never going to touch hardware because they're all about the scalability of, SaaS software and how there's zero marginal cost for each additional, customer basically. So they're not your person. It's like, great, thanks for your time. If you have any recommendations for people who are, awesome. But don't take that as a diss against your company or that there isn't anyone out there. You didn't find the right person yet. And it can feel kind of shitty for a while when you're having all the ones where you're not meeting the right person.
We should have a drinking game. I think she'd have like 4 drinks in now.
Anyways, so I mean, that's the factor, I think.
Can I respond with one thing on that? So I had actually a mentor who was looking kind of through the pitch deck, and he was like, oh, well, I would never invest in it. And I'm smiling the entire time. And he goes, I've never seen anyone so happy when I was tearing what they were doing to shreds. And I was like, why? It helps me to understand that you're there. Besides, you're just one no closer to a yes. Yeah. And he started cracking up, and he's actually given me great advice and like wants to keep seeing what I'm doing.
Well, you were open to feedback. Absolutely. Yeah. That's exciting to me. When someone says that I'm wrong, I'm not going to give them someone else to talk to. But if they're listening to me, I'm like, oh, they're teachable. They're going to pivot when I ask them to someday.
I loved his feedback because it was so raw and so honest that it was a benefit, even though it wasn't positive towards what I was doing.
And some of them you'll get that are just not helpful. Like we had one guy who said our whole presentation was great if we just took the woman part out. And I was like, that is the part. Like that. No, I mean, you guys are really impressive. And like, what if you maybe just didn't mention the women part? I'm like, that's literally the whole thesis. Like lunch was great. We're going to go now.
So kind of exactly on that note, there's been some articles lately talking about like this awesome breast pump that's better than all the other breast pumps, and how VCs fund things that they understand, but the VC community is a lot of men. And so a lot of products for women, a lot of opportunities for women get shut down because VCs pattern match in what they want to invest in and who they want to invest with. What options or what solutions can we find as a entrepreneurship community to try to get products that are either targeted towards women or friendly towards women to get the attention of the VC community?
Well, I'm hoping that headline in the New Yorker that said, "Why do VCs hate women and their babies?" makes some people like wake up a little bit, because it was pretty poignant. So it is definitely a real problem. So I alluded to it before, but something like between 4 and 6% of venture capital partners are men. But when you strip out things like the operating partners and the CFOs and the chief revenue officers or whatever the VC funds, and you really look at who's making investment decisions, it might literally be 1%. And that's clearly correlation, right? Not causation for men aren't going to never invest in women, but there's actually lots of data that shows that when there are more women in venture capital funds, they're actually twice as likely to invest in a woman CEO and 3 times, or as a woman founder, and 3 times as likely to invest in a woman CEO. So it's real. And this pattern matching around products is there are enough anecdotes to kind of prove the case that men don't actually get the problem with the breast pump because they don't have it on them. And so I am actually hopeful that the amount of attention that's been paid to the gender topic this year is actually at an extreme amount between the sexual harassment cases and these kind of stories, that funds are certainly starting to hire more women, or at least change their websites to put their interns and their secretaries very prominently on their team page, which is definitely happening, unfortunately. But there are actually, it's so small in numbers because only 1% are women, but there are actually a lot more women funds out there. I don't think this problem has to just be, solved by women investors, but I think it can have a massive impact. And so, hey, if you know people who want to invest in our fund, we can actually invest in more companies.
And there's money out there. And Kerry and Sarah do a really good job of making sure if it's not a right fit for you, they send it on to me, they send it on to 100 other women that could help out.
But it obviously, there's not enough yet to do that. And so, to my point earlier about putting yourselves in other contexts, I think is helpful. So some of the data that's been shown through research studies shows that, there is gender bias out there, and it's actually not just men against women. It's women against women too. So I've quoted the study before and other things, but there's a study that Harvard Business School, MIT, and Wharton did, having the exact same business plan be presented by attractive male, attractive female, unattractive female. And not only does the attractive male get the most funding, but the attractive female gets the least. So she's being penalized for being attractive, but women investors act exactly the same way. And so the women are actually penalizing the women for the same thing. So there's this cultural bias out there. And it's something, it happens in the pitch sort of process of that, standing or going into a room or being at a pitch contest. And so I think there's a couple mitigating factors. I don't have all the answers, but one is getting yourself in different kinds of environments. So Village Capital is this fund. It's an impact focused fund in DC. They run kind of an accelerator sort of program, and it's like a survivor model. So at the end of the program, they let the peers choose which companies should get funded. And by doing that, 40% of the deals that get funded there are women-led and 30% are minority. And usually it's like 2% women and 1% minority. So it's a really dramatic impact. And it's because the format is different, is that they've spent 3 months getting to know each other, and the peers start saying, who do I trust? Who's transparent? Whose idea is great? Who got through the hurdles, et cetera. And so if you can find other environments like getting to know a VC over time in a different setting, or looking at these alternative, crowdfunding kind of options, et cetera, that makes it harder. I mean, I'm not helping you with an easy answer, but I think getting yourself outside of those traditional models. I think also knowing some of the mitigating factors. So some of the other studies show that men VCs judge men and women differently in terms of the words that they would use to describe the men and women, like after a pitch, or they ask them different questions. And so actually looking at the kinds of questions that men get asked and making your FAQ page or whatever, or preemptively answering the kinds of questions, being more strategic about it. Women do tend to undersell and not have the bravado that men do. Frankly, it is also one of the reasons that I think that they outperform, because they're actually more pragmatic and reasonable about their assumptions. But maybe being conscious of that bias, going into it and making sure that you're striving for the big picture, the big potential return. I can't tell you how many, we've had several deals come to us where the entrepreneur's been like, well, I think I can get to 15 million. And we're like, well, come back to us and show us a model, just your big picture model of what if you also went to this marketer through this distribution channel? What might it look like to get to like 30 million? And they come back and they're like, no, I think I can only get to 15. And while like I appreciate like their humbleness or whatever, or they're like not wanting to, like you got to see the big opportunity, right? And so finding a balance between those traits that I think make women be more successful, and also making sure you don't penalize yourself by not actually, you know, being bold, et cetera, and finding out how to mitigate that in your presentations is a start too. Yeah, of course.
I'm Oksana Malyshev. I'm the CEO of Sputnik, and I just wanted to add one thing on that one, which is let's know your audience. Because let's give you the breast pump example. For sure, you cannot expect a room full of men to know about breast pumps. Like, so if you're going into the men-led fund, which it very often will happen for you, so you need to, and if, for instance, your business has to do with the female issues, there are a whole bunch of tricks that could make it funny and colorful to explain why that is the issue. And in fact, you could talk to them about fact and data, but also get some emotion where you could ask, who of you had a baby recently? So please do me a favor, when you come home tonight, talk to your wife about her experience in breast pumping. What was that? In other words, I think you could make a joke on that, and like, for instance, I would pitch, you know, my experience with a breast pump where I was pumping in a flight to Singapore, and like, you know, how that looked at. There are a lot of things that you could make it fun, you could make it light, because we will not change overnight the fact that majority of the funds that will be available to you controlled by men. So while you just heard you will face more problems with that, don't give up on them. They have mothers, they have sisters, they have wives. So they may want to help you, they may just not know how, so help them.
Yeah, and actually it's a great point, and I think it actually is applicable even across other things, is that you want to tell the story, when you're working on your elevator pitch, is to put the person listening into the shoes of the person who has the pain, as opposed to because they might not, you know, be a long distance trucking shipping company and you've got software for logistics for long distance trucking, and I don't really know the problem of that. But if you helped me say, imagine you're a long distance shipping guy and your problem every day is that you're trying to solve X and Y, and like this always goes wrong. And then I have the solution that, you know, solves for X, and I go, oh, I never knew that that was a problem, but you put me in the shoes of that person, and actually, and that's useful for all elevator pitches, right, is to reframe for the investor, not do I think that's cool and do I need it, right, but imagine you have this, imagine you're this person and you have this pain, might you want the solution? And so all the more so in that case of using the example of, well, imagine what if you had to go to work every day and do something super embarrassing. So I have a dramatic story about that. There was a woman that we saw pitch in Silicon Valley who has an alternative product for menstruation. And so instead of it being a tampon, it's a different kind of product. And, you know, she found that she was able to do this with her board members, so you're not going to be able to do this in a pitch for sure, but just the dramatic lengths at which you have to go to. She actually made her board members wear a wet maxi pad in a meeting to have them get a sense of what the, you know, state-of-the-art product was, and why they might actually want an alternative. And I, you know, that's a really, obviously like an extreme example, but she did it to help them see, like, what are you facing? And so
what we're going to trend on.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to trend on.
Yeah, who's tweeting? Please don't put this on Twitter. No. It will be too awkward. But I really think it is important to think about, okay, so I can't do that. That's too awful. But what could you do to help them understand actually sort of the context of the problem that you're trying to solve for? You've had a lot. Let's see, Haley, maybe? Someone bring a mic to Haley. Oh, okay. Sorry. Why don't you take you first and then you hand it to Haley?
Okay. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I am putting together our use of funds table right now, and we are having a huge internal discussion about how we set founder salaries. So I was wondering what advice you had on that.
Well, what are you thinking?
Well, my two partners are very senior in the industry. You know, one could be a CTO of a video game company. And so what we were trying to do is roughly half of what we're worth in the industry. But that kind of depends on what, you know, what investor we're talking about and how well they know our space.
I think once you go over 150,000, we don't pay attention as much. But up to 150, I think angels are with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, you know, for younger people who have the capacity to, they don't have mortgages and families, et cetera, like 75, but you've got people who just have life burdens. And this gets to the point about, like, what are you putting in for equity? Like, a lot of times you just can't put cash in. You've been putting cash into the business, or you're just not in a place. But that balance of, okay, showing what you're giving up and the opportunity cost and helping them understand the market rates is important.
Hey y'all, my name is Haley Netherton. I'm a venture associate at Capital Factory. I just wanted to comment on your comment on other resources out in the community for women-led startups. So at Capital Factory, we exclusively focus on tech. If you're interested in becoming a member, we have 160 mentors on site, including Kerry and other awesome people like her who can help out. I personally work on our Accelerator Venture Fund. We'd love to help out as well. There are other additional great resources like SKU for consumer packaged goods, Mass Challenge, which is an incredible worldwide organization. They just came to Texas. They are looking for, I think, about 100 startups to start in January. They come along with funding. From what I've heard, considerable amount of funding to go around. That's another option, as well as Div Inc. They're a pre-accelerator program that's run at a Capital Factory. All really great options to look at. So
thank you. And don't forget our sponsors, Sputnik, who are launching tomorrow.
As well. Yeah. Go check them out
Which
as
we
well.
will learn more about shortly.
Yeah.
Yep. Pass it along. It's right there.
Hey, just want to pile on a little more. A great resource that you might have been thinking of this, Kerry, was Dave Altunian and Stephen Strauss compiled like the almost be-all, end-all of Capital in Austin. So I just tweeted that out with the hashtag we're all using. It's a great post on Medium that y'all could look into. I work for 3 Day Startup. We run intensive weekend programs to teach people how to start companies. So if you're in the audience and maybe you're not quite ready for Kerry or for Kelsey, but you are looking to get started and you have an idea, we are actually running a program with Div Inc. at Capital Factory for women and minority founders on October 20th. It is free. There's food. There's going to be amazing mentors, amazing panelists. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I know Kerry and True Wealth have been tweeting about it, but you can also just look up 3 Day Startup Div Inc. Yeah.
All right, we've got one in the front row. Oh, and one out back there. You guys have got numbers. 9608, please.
Yeah, we do. You don't know your numbers, though.
I've never actually been down here in an Alamo before.
We could wait here. We could help.
Yeah.
Staff.
We need a Live Oak Hefeweizen at 9617, please.
Oh, sorry. My name is Annie Hardy. So what I'm trying to build has to do with empathy, and it has to do with people who are building products and building companies for those who are unlike them. And what I'm finding is that there are some enlightened people, enlightened investors, enlightened, like I just spoke with an equity company yesterday who sat across the table from me as we were talking about building a product together or a project together. And they looked at me and they said, here's the deal. We're building stuff for people that are totally not like us. And we're starting to ask the questions of design for people who are different. I find that rare. I find that there are these brilliant, amazing investors and enterprises and M&A who are focused on smarter design and smarter companies for people who are not like them. But I wanted to see if you're seeing that growth as well, or if there's any movement in that. Are people who have money, men, mostly white men, are they asking these questions?
It's very hard when you're in the power position to realize that there's any reason to change. And so there are a few white male VCs who are thinking, oh, shoot, there's some great data that says that if I have, you know, people of different ethnicities and people of different socioeconomic backgrounds and people of different genders on my team, I might have better financial performance. Because there's plenty of actual studies that are starting to show that team performance is better with all of those different kinds of diversity. most people who are already doing great and making lots of money don't think about why they have to change and do something differently. Even in the world of VC, which is kind of funny because they're supposed to be looking for disruptive innovation and outliers. So what we're finding is having, just from our point of view as a VC fund that's trying to do something different or to leverage diversity, at least gender diversity, is that we're having to find the people who are the change makers and the disruptive, challengers. And that the only way to change the system is to start changing who's funding the system. And that means changing who's funding us, who's funding you. And I think, so as a capitalist who, wants social change, I find that being able to affect it by actually outshowing and better financial performance is going to be the thing that will actually, sort of move the people who haven't been moved otherwise. And maybe it's unfortunate that has to be the lever, but it could be an effective lever. So I know, for example, that, occasionally Sarah and I have come in to talk to an old white male, family office guy who's got the body language of basically his feet up on his desk and his arms crossed, who is like, oh, women-led companies, great. And when he starts to see the data of 35% higher returns or 12% revenue growth, all of a sudden he's leaning forward. And if that's what it's going to take to actually show that you can actually impact financial performance by having diversity and thinking about other points of view, then I think that's the lever that can be useful.
Well, and it goes back to storytelling as well, because I hope none of my brethren from CTAN are watching, but many of them go home and they talk to their wives or their daughters, and they learn a whole bunch. So if you can put a scenario or two of how they can take that away, it'd be good.
I mean, actually, it's really interesting. There's a study that just came out in Harvard Business Review really recently that actually VC funds where the men partners have daughters do better. And the chain is because the partners who have daughters have started to realize that their daughters are actually pretty smart and interesting. So they're more likely to hire women. And when they hire women, they're more likely to invest in entrepreneurs who have women on the team. And those companies are likely to perform better. And that is literally the chain. And it goes back to, I didn't realize women were smart until I had some of my own. And I'm annoyed that they're hitting hurdles. And it's like, well, it's unfortunate that that's what it took to get there. But we actually kind of target potential investors where the guys have daughters of a certain age because they're starting to see, my daughters are really capable. So we thought we'd solve this like in the 70s with women's lib.
Well, if I may, quick question. Hi. Quick question for Kelsey. In terms of C10 investment, is there a strategic time to apply for the C10? The fund rounds. Is it? We have revenue right now, and we have not launched yet.
What's that word? Revenue.
Yeah,
That's exciting. Right there. That's a good one.
So we have had revenue for 3 months now, and we have not launched. We're getting ready to launch. So, however, we have heard that, maybe you need to demonstrate more traction, right? How much traction? But, really the question lies in what is the strategic point to apply? Because, go ahead, yeah.
So, different verticals, right? I would say we have a due diligence officer, and when you apply, Mark Thorson will tell you right away what he feels about your pitch deck and where you are. I think that we're welcoming most companies right off the bat, especially if you have revenue. But again, the mentoring every first Wednesday, you'll talk to 20 angels and they'll tell you, oh yes, thumbs up, please come to our next cycle, or maybe in another cycle in 2.5 months.
Well, and this is an outsider's perspective from what I've heard, so Kelsey, you can vet me if I'm right, but that having a sponsor or fans within the CTAN group before you actually do apply, so that when they're looking at your deal, someone will be like, I met with them, I loved what they were doing, I talked to the entrepreneur, is valuable. So the reason for the office hours are not only to get the mentorship and advice from the people there, but are to find the people who are going to be your champions, so that when you do apply, you've already got some people in your back pocket who are your champions.
Well, that happens immediately. You'll leave after that at noon. We debrief for a half an hour, and we come and we tag you and we invite you to join the cycle. So we're talking about you. Your ears are burning.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I think that's about as much time as we have for questions, but clearly there's a lot more, and we built in some time for networking, so we want to make sure everyone sticks around, continue to ask questions, keep the conversation going. Don't forget also that we have photo booth set up if you want to update your LinkedIn photo. Public service announcement for the Female Founders Facebook group. They've got flyers at the front desk where you checked in. And so please take those with you. There's a save the date for a Growing Female Founders discovery session on Saturday, November 4th. And so please make sure to take that with you if you're interested. And just thanks again for coming, everybody. We're glad to see you here.
Thank you.
Well, I have one other thing. This is a little bit random, but if you're in fintech,
Always the last word, this one.
Always
the last
It's not even for me. I'm just promoting
and it's
another
going to be a lot of
resource.
words. Hang on, 2 minutes. Go.
Fintech or insurance tech companies, there's a new accelerator. We're having a pitch event in New York. They opened applications today. It is not a market where there are many women. So spreading the word wide, if you have a company in that space, it's called Female Founders something. I don't know. It's on my Twitter, or I'll tell you it. You can come find me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
That was less than 2 minutes.
But I shamed you, didn't I?
Totally. Thank you for participating with me.